I hope you can hear me in the back. Are you okay? Okay, good. So thank you for being here tonight. It is a pleasure to introduce this conversation between landscape architect Isabelle Greene and poet, writer, and artist Hazel White. My name is Sylvia Brea. I am the curator of the Architecture and Design Collection here at the museum. First of all, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Kitchell, for enabling us to produce this series of lectures on architecture and design. And we're very grateful for having Shane Mahan, regional representative of the company, here with us today. Thank you, Shane, for joining us. So it is not a coincidence that our next two lectures in the Kitchell Architecture and Design series are about landscape architecture and by two renowned women in the field, Isabelle Greene and Susan Van Ada, a fact that fills us with joy and pride. Reflecting on our connection with nature seems urgent today in light of the extended overexploitation and neglect of our planet's natural resources. Landscape architecture is, before all, and as our speakers will stress tonight, an act of love for the soil we inhabit. Learning about the commitment of landscape architects towards restoring, enhancing, and increasing the resilience of the natural environment will, if nothing more, reassure our stance about the need to care for such environment. Isabelle Greene has worked in this direction for the last 5.5 decades, contributing to shape the sense of the natural local of many places around our country. In Santa Barbara, she has built herself a reputation designing earthscapes or climate-adapted gardens using native plants, man-made elements, and boulders of the majestic mountains around us, all while in considering the different moods of the nature and the creative imprint of time on her gardens. Isabelle's multidisciplinary background enriches her approach to each project. Along with a license in landscape architecture, she holds degrees in botany with an emphasis in taxonomy from UCLA, and art with a focus on painting from UCSB. Iconic gardens such as the Lovelace, the Valentine, or the Pulitzer carry her signature. At her 80 and something years young, Isabelle continues to paint with nature's brush as she sees her practice, bringing the legacy she received from her grandfather, the architect and landscape designer, Henry Mather Greene, to new heights. Throughout the course of her career, she has completed over 500 projects.
600.
600. I was not aware of the last, 2 years of your practice. And you will know Isabelle even if you haven't met her yet. 2 boulders selected by her and placed in front of the museum greet you anytime you enter these galleries. In 2005, Kurt Helfrich organized a major retrospective about Isabelle's work in this same space. In 2017, a good portion of her impressive archive joined our architecture and design collection. And today, we examine the cross-pollination between her art and landscape architecture in the gallery next door, an installation that has been curated by our colleague, Julie Larson. Thank you, Isabelle, for the role you have played in all of these endeavors and for supporting the museum's mission and programs so actively. Hazel White is an English poet, artist, and writer. Among her celebrated poetry publications is Vigilance is No Orchard, inspired by the garden that Isabelle Greene created for Carlo Valentine in Montecito. The book was a finalist for the 2019 California Book Award, the National Poetry Series, and the Fence Online Poetry Award. White's public work includes presentations at SF MoMA, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and Headland Center for the Arts, where she is an affiliate artist, and her work is part of the Key Room Permanent Collection. Hazel White is a recipient of the Creative Work Fund grant, and her poetry has appeared in numerous journals. Thank you, Hazel, for leading this conversation with Isabelle today. Please join me in welcoming Hazel White into the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia, very much. Is the microphone working? Yes, great, thank you. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Emily, for helping put everything together so well. And thank you, audience. Wonderful to have such a large group of people here this evening. And I just want to thank, in particular, Ramsey Breslin and Susan Gebertz, wonderful friends and poets who've come from the Bay Area. So this lecture is in 3 parts. For the first 15, 18 minutes, I'm going to talk about the story of how this book got written and what moved me about Isabelle's work, and read from the book a little. And then Isabelle's going to come up and join me, and we're going to sit here, and I'm going to ask her a few questions. And then we're going to open it up to you, and we're very eager to hear your questions. And then we'll sign books again on the way out. So I'll begin at the beginning. It's now something like 22 years ago that I was a writer about landscape architecture and garden design. I was writing books and for international magazines. And I was sat in my office one day and I turned the page of a magazine and saw an image of a garden. So I suddenly had this huge jolt in my body, like electricity, a sort of disorientation of the mind. I sort of lost my mind. And the effect was physical, entirely physical. And I felt disoriented for maybe at least 3 weeks. But the body was sure. I knew that at that very moment that I would do anything it took to stand in that space. And so I called, within 24 hours, I'd figured it out that the garden had been built by famous landscape architect Isabelle Greene from Santa Barbara, and it was the garden that belonged to Carol Valentine in Montecito. And I called her. I'll read the first 2 pages of the book. Finding a photograph of the Valentine garden, my gaze locked, then my elbow dropped. I was holding something. Writing had become turgid, ordinate, whereas this garden, with the arrow flowers and lilies, both ribbed, unfolded shockingly flat. A view encourages distribution, so I set out to advance beyond habit to the entrance, which landscape architect Isabelle Greene shaped low and open to draw a visitor forward. 17 years pass, and I'm looking back to tell the Valentine story from all points of contact. Terraces that stepped down gently were a clue that Greene intended a seamless departure. My feet anchored in ground cover, my head could ride the lines there on air's back. Also the pond, where to hang under the reeds on the slate over the water is gulping shelter and view at once. And I plunged into reflection and lugged the light in the sky back to the firm rock. I bowed low to Greene's motion, accepted the blow of it. I must know the how of its thinnest leaf on its strongest breeze. Be sure, as my back was bending in astonishment. I would trespass, attention iterating, amplifying, manic, exactly how I had dreamt it. Let me turn up the volume. My acquaintance with the image did not... let me turn up the volume.
It's a little echoey in here.
I'll keep speaking while you keep trying. Let me turn up the volume. My acquaintance with the image did not begin dimly. I lost my basket. How are we doing now in terms of staff? Okay. So when I called Isabelle, my small rational side reasserted itself. I was embarrassed by my emotional charged state, and I sort of did I'm a writer of landscape architecture, I'm writing books, Chronicle is publishing, And Isabelle was surrounded by people who wanted to see her and talk to her. She was internationally known already. And she was gracious and invited me to come see some of her gardens, and her assistant would show me them. But I did eventually gain her attention, and I got to see the Valentine garden. Now, I had been banking on, as soon as I saw it, I would surely be able to read it, because I had been writing about landscape architecture for years, and then it would be over. You know. But when I got there, there was no conventional landscape architecture language in play. There were no focal points, no reliance on geometry, which would have shown me how to proceed through the garden. There was no exhibition of wealth, which would have shown me what I should look at. There was no sweet sort of confinement, although there were walls that the architect had built, which Isabelle hated. So instead of that conventional language, rather what happened there was that, again, I became super alert, and I was looking at a space where it had been boldly blown open, sort of openness to the air and to animate life. And instead of shelter, or was this a startling variation of physical shelter, an intimacy of intense particular beauty, here and here and here, and exquisitely maintained, which is surely a form of love by Carol for Isabelle. So the garden captured me. Surely I was its perfect visitor. I chased it, I loved it. I made a vow. I embarked on a grand devotion. White walls part the garden from the hillside oaks. That's hard on me. These are the words of Isabelle when I do this. To make a garden or a text show up, one needs the connections to be manifold. But I hate geometry. Instead, she trusts loose horizontals, extensions wide and visceral, because real work is hospitality, a cloud dispersing to what's beneath, sky opens to surround it. In awe of her, shyly I proposed a half-lie, and she declined it. Again for 3 years, until my devotion steered language to volume, line, thrill, tapped a recalcitrant orientation, and she spilled a fierce, polyamorous vocabulary of making, propagative sinew of a silence that had sloughed off safety. We touched it, we clinched it. I don't like walls, I don't like separation. Beauty is not shelter, it necessitates a forward momentum. So my desire, though the phrasing small and never named as envy, I wished I would write about her. I came out with it. Her constructions crossed the hill against the wind and sun, pulled the space taut to demonstrate the filigree of survival. Tangles eased out in coincidences and moving things about. No focal point, rather a bohemia tree with horizontal branches, and just below it to one side, a bohemia shrub, espaliered, so white, flowering, naturally floaty layers reflect the lines of the white stucco walls. As in tango with kiss, back, one. I chose immersion. When space conjoins like that, as in the image in the magazine, vault between spine stem and ribs, broad and green and the air, wait for me. Alertness, hospitality, animate life, everything in the present tense of being made. Isabelle told me that she left clues around in her garden to get people into the game. but I was lost, and because, partly perhaps because of my Britishness, I didn't like it. I could not welcome bewilderment. So I stayed safe and continued to call myself a garden writer. I described myself that way to Lillian Lovelace when I stayed at her tea house. Isabelle had created the garden for Lillian, and it included a pool, which is perhaps the most famous, or one of the few very most famous, examples of pools in landscape architecture in the late 20th century. It was published all over the world. So it looks like a pond in the woods. You enter between boulders and you swim around them. So I stayed there, and the first night I heard things outside, and in the morning there were giant paw prints on the deck. That and the moving landscape between the tea house and the pool triggered a surge of wildness in me, and the work leapt toward a new phase of emergence. We hoped that Lillian was going to be here tonight, and I was going to thank her for that. Enterprise getting off the ground and staunchly emerald, yet the hillside at the Valentine Garden is turning thrifty. Beauty howling off the image creates a grave disorientation, clumsy shift in pivot into thinning, bruising switcheroos. And then the work that started at Lillian's tea house is in a section called What Wants to Occur. Cleverness doesn't cut it at the threshold from one experience to another. A bird flits from boulder to boulder, tries out a nook near the water, swoops right by here as in a plot twist, or something sprouting in the heat of meeting, with no pause as being goes slickly through the slip knot into doing. One day from the tea house, I visited the Valentine Garden. The property was uninhabited at the time. A field day, as wasps know, crawling, split fruit. Visiting the Valentine Garden, I trespass and steal figs. Purple juice puts blood back in my enterprise. This isn't voice, but sinew in the summer heat, an open realm. Harvest uttering carnally. I want to live in the green, and this wants out of me onto the page. At the Lovelace Garden down San Isidro Lane, a meadow under oaks lengthens toward moisture. Grass is tufted, throat clearing. I arrived once, an architect, come west on a wagon seat, planted my head in the hut, and ranged for information. Now, many years later, adept at losing shelter, knowing also what a view extracts from me, an evolutionary arrangement, I learned this Lovelace tunnel of light and land slanting holds the mouth soft to allow an easy birthing, a feeling for the crease in an arroyo, down in it and way back up the other side. And then this emergence of a stronger voice. I say right now, I want to wear a man's shirt and Paul Smith summer boots. No laces, but a full enclosure. A vow against tiptoeing in landscape as a profile of thinking. Here I am, the architecture close in, the Valentine entrance, and I will raid it. Do I want tall or do I want... Green silences the architect's white wall by planting 2 eucalyptus trees to whistle over it. The eye hops right up, ears listen branch to moving branch, and the present tense warms what's freshly bare, revealing a woman to herself. Space exactly the way I want it. Isabelle's words. So I really struggled. I haven't read those pages. I I had promised Isabelle that I would write a coffee table book. I took a year off work and failed to write it. I went to an agent in New York who was very excited about it, but wanted it to be about 2 landscape architects, and I said no. So passionate was I that the book be just the way. Then I went to do an MFA in writing, and Susan Gevirtz was my dear teacher there. So I was trying to match my writing to Isabelle's work and to my experience of it. And so, frankly, I had to become a poet to do that. And then the risk of that, and the promise of it, to make space or text any way you want it, to be in the process super alert and in motion and porous to beauty and animate life. To, so to speak, go for an overflow of reality. Eventually, the transformation occurred. The poetry book was being written. The image faded and was lost. Carol Valentine passed away. The garden changed hands. And the project ended with a sense of loss. So I'll just read a few, 3 last pages and then welcome Isabelle up here. There are 4 pages in the book that are quotes from Isabelle. We talked for years, maybe 100 hours, 40 of them are taped. And we also have quite a bulk of correspondence. So these quotes are from that material. Isabelle's words. When everything above in the sky is dark, say after a rainstorm at the end of the day, and there's something in the foreground that is brilliantly lit by a low slanting sun, I feel love then. It is just it and me, no separation. Bless you, dear one, source of so many good things. Would to God we lived closer. A gloss idles over the garden, aging flowers face one way then another, regardless. The vision was not mine to keep, it slows and fails. I think we were trying to match ourselves to the idea we had of it. The garden gone its own way, lost now from the page, fading effects I could not anticipate. This wash altogether unseen, jammed in calancholy, needs replanting or call the project done. Leaning in, one can see what one color, sadness, does to another. Looking over the wall, escarpment of acid yellow sedum, smell it and don't know what to do. In a nutshell, I've thought about verticals only as line, not as volume. My own field of ground covers dense with overoccurrence, defoliation now the topic. And yet the land lets me down gently. Green made it so, to a white silver field of snow in summer. Thank you. Isabelle, we're going to sit here, so I hope you can see us.
You know, it is somewhat echoey in here. Are you catching enough of it? No? Okay. I don't know what Hazel's going to say or ask.
Is there anything you want to say before we get started?
Yes. I
thought there
was spellbound.
Oh.
And close to tears. Enough. Of course, I've heard you read it many times before.
You have?
Mm-hmm.
I thought you were going to take issue with something. No.
Well, I'll think about it. There we go.
perhaps could you also start at the beginning? You were in your 40s, I think, when you started work at the Valentine Garden.
Probably in the
And I-
80s.
And I believe that you weren't a licensed landscape
Oh,
architect.
absolutely, no. I was green. I was unsure. I knew that I didn't know what I was doing.
What were you up to then at that time in your life?
Well, I would say I was feeling my way into something that was feeling right, but not very much right. And I was trying to make a living. And I knew I wanted clients. And I knew the way to get there was to be a landscape architect. So I was hopefully becoming a landscape architect. And I had met Carol Valentine. I knew her to be a great aficionado of the arts and of gardens. And frankly, I was overawed. I had no idea how to bring myself up to the level that I thought she was. So she hired the best architect in town, that was Paul Gray, and he designed this brutally modern house that offended me completely. And I didn't know what to do. And a friend said, well, take it as a challenge. You know, it'll be famous. And so I thought, oh, heck, I'll just defy all this.
I remember that.
And so the architect had planned some very tall, steep, white-walled planters. So I thought, I'll just put giant cactus up there, and I'll put fragrant citrus, and it'll smell good, and what the heck? And it sort of built from there.
You said, you told me you leave little clues around in your gardens to get people into the game. We don't identify them, I don't think, necessarily. The whole enterprise is perhaps not about knowing, though. Your work stirs us, we feel it. And is that your goal, that we feel?
Absolutely, that may be the only goal, but to feel good. I don't think I was into the clues for Carol Valentine's. I was it was such a strong and strict environment. I don't think I felt that chummy and that casual yet.
And what were you doing when you started to leave little clues around? Can you give any examples? I thought the white bohemia against the white was a play on white horizontality, but that wasn't an example of a clue.
Well, that was, I think, to please me. Those dim white walls, cutting her off from the oaks. And so what do you do with that? Well, how about building on that? Some more linear things. Oh, and then we can make them white flowers. And, oh, we can make them orange flowers. And kind of get away from what seems so severe.
Connection. Your garden is, I remember you said once that a garden is just a little thing in itself. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
And that you want to connect us to the larger world.
I think that people's plot of land, their house and their little plot of land, be it, you know, a lot or 50 acres, it's still a very small, inconsequential thing, sort of floating around in a very, very important universe. And I always wanted to kind of reach over there and connect something to the mountains and to the vegetation and to the seacoast that's beside us. And to kind of anchor these little man-made things into something that feels solid and gives back.
Can you give me any examples of, I remember something like, well, you don't like walls.
I guess. I didn't like those walls.
And I remember something about a garden where you had stepped down the walls to avoid the sharp vertical or something like that?
I do, yeah. I think that walls are bodily aggressive. I think when you're confronted with a wall, it means stop here, no fooling. And if you have to get down, designers that say, well, we'll cut a little place here and we'll go step, 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 step down, and you have to do it just right, and you have to exert all that effort. I think that's offensive. And so I would rather step down in increments, softly, gently. I would prefer, rather than a stucco wall that's man-made, I would prefer a sloping boulder that lets you down, and perhaps some steps here and there so that the trip is more interesting and it's not so physically stupid.
Yeah, I was wondering about that word offensive, as in not hospitality, or being told what to do, just walk down this thing.
Partly that. A very recent job, let's see, how was the existing walk? It was sort of like this, and then like this, and then like this.
Straight.
So the walk is telling you, you know, if you were the Gestapo, what's the military term? Turn right, you know, turn left here. And it's silly because the person wants to go from here to where they want to go, the nicest way. And I think these geometrical things get built because it's easy to draw it on paper, sitting at a desk with a ruler and all that. And it looks really good. Look at my drawing. And it doesn't have anything to do with relating how a person really likes to pass through a landscape or a building.
So, so you're designing for an experience of space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of passing through space. And recalling that my grandfather and his brother in their houses rounded all the corners. Everything is round. Where you pass by, it's round. The banister is round. The corner is round. Very beautifully rounded. And the beams and everything up above are round too. And frequently modern houses have steel or marble with very sharp corners, and when you go around, you impale yourself in the hip. And that's dead wrong, I think. If you have to go back and forth to get the napkins and you get a bruise, how stupid. I'm teaching you all how to design.
That reminds me when you were actually invited to Europe to be with John Brooks, who's a legendary garden designer, and somebody else, I think, maybe Topher Delaney, but yeah, the three of you
Jim Van Sweden.
Jim Van Sweden, and the three of you were going to teach people how to design. And do you want to say how that went?
Well, I had to watch my tongue. I just sort of chuckled up my sleeve. John Brooks made his students very happy because he told them, now you start with a house and you look out the window and you draw lines from the window and you draw lines from the house and then you cut these up into squares. And the students were very happy to make this plan and like they'd done something. And actually, I didn't fare so well in teaching my students. I told them to take a chair and sit in it for a while and come back and talk with me, and they didn't notice anything and say anything. So I told them, go sit again and notice what you feel and see what you want. You want a little more shade than you had? Do you need a view? Would you like to be up higher so you can see? And those are the things that I build gardens for people to be in. But it does take a lot of effort and it takes a lot of concentration and a lot of detailing. You can't whip it out by formula, and that's just the way I do it.
I think your clients appreciate that.
Well, they come for me.
All 600 of them. You graciously gave me the run of your office on my visits down to Santa Barbara, and I came across a big file, or maybe even several files, called images. I wondered if you could tell us about those files and what was happening when you looked at those images.
Those files started early on. Because I wasn't trained, and I was doing everything by the seat of my pants, I never knew if I was going to come out okay, if I was going to come out at all. And I would be designing something and I get sort of stuck and I get kind of glum and I had no idea what to do. One thing that I would do would be get the car and run out to the site, and I'd usually get kind of a hit and something to go. But it was a little more convenient to have these beautiful images of anything, an old tree, or a Japanese pagoda with snow on it, or the leg of a horse or something, just images that I liked. And I would paw through them. I'd sometimes put favorite ones around and just kind of enjoy what I was taking in, and I would always get some inspiration, and then I was off and running. Then the ideas would come. Somewhat later, I found out that I cannot design if I'm unhappy, and that in order to design well, I have to get myself happy, and that's really the clue.
To look at images.
Well, that was a sort of a crib note. That was a way to get to something quick. Mm-hmm. Everybody has their ways of crib notes.
I also found in your office a flat file of figure drawings, and I gasped. Suddenly I understood it. You were an artist, and that my strong response had been because of the fact that the image was an art piece, in a way. So would you say something about your art practice or your artist training?
Well, at the time you came down, I didn't know I was an artist. I would never have said so. And I was doing art, and for some reason or other, it was this kind of secret hobby, maybe. My parents gave me art lessons when I was a child, thank goodness. You know, this nice teacher in Pasadena had maybe a half a dozen young people. I don't know why I was so apart from my art. I still feel a little squeamish about it. But people like my drawings and my paintings, and I find out that if I don't look at them for a while, then pull them out and I do. And I'm even known to sell something and come back years later and it's hanging on the wall. I say, well, that's a nice drawing. Where did it come from? And it's mine. So it's a peculiar, I will now say I'm an artist, maybe because everybody says so.
Okay.
But I don't quite understand what the heck it is I'm doing with this.
So I'm going to ask one last question before I open it up.
I will
Yeah.
put a little more on that. I do very well understand that looking at things like an artist, using my eye is what's allowed me to jump out of convention and rearrange things so that I think they'll work. And if I did not have that eye that spies things and latches onto them and puts them together, I probably couldn't do that, at least not nearly so easily.
So last night you got news of a brand new project. You got the go on it. Will you tell us about it?
I still feel jittery.
Jittery?
Mm-hmm. All excited, I'm all on Twitter. I feel like I've had a lot of coffee or something. It's not a new project, but it's been in the works. It's been coming for about a year. I've made drawings, but it was on hold for nearly half a year because of money. And I wasn't exactly told we're going to go, but I was told that he had already hired the builder to do the retaining wall so that the grading could go, so that the lake could be built. And I know, and listening to my client's voice and how different he sounded, I know that we're in for a big push for a year or two. So that was thrilling. Also very easing.
So it has a lake, this new project?
Didn't I tell you?
No.
Oh, Hazel. Well, this is nothing else than the Blacker House in Pasadena, which I think is Greene and Greene's largest commission in Pasadena. Very, very beautiful, huge wooden craftsman house. And my client bought the property. He wanted to do a life's work on restoring a Greene and Greene. After all the 5.5 acres around it had been parceled off in the 40s and sold and was made into subdivisions. So he has been restoring the house and buying parcels back, and I've been helping him knit together little pieces of the garden, so he had somewhat more garden. There are lots of historical photographs. Well, he purchased the 5th parcel at the first of this year and said, Isabelle, now I bought 1235 Hillcrest Avenue. Do you think we have enough land to recreate the lake? And there are beautiful, very good photographs of the estate and the gardens and this large lake. And so I got out the photographs and I penciled in from the survey where we could put the lake, and I looked at sight lines across the house to see if the lake went beyond the sight line and so on, and drew this shape, and it seemed to match a flyover. And I said, I think so. So I've been making drawings for this lake. It's 1/8 of an acre for a good half of a year. But it's never been yes or no or do it or don't do it. It's just making drawings and hope. So it's going to go, and we're going to do this lake, and it's rather stunning, and it actually has a swimming pool embedded in it that the water is cleansed by the plantings around rather than by chlorine, all kinds of good things.
Thank you, Isabelle.
Oh, I didn't say my initial thing. I'm so thrilled to see so many of my friends here from far away. Really wonderful.
Now it's your turn. We're eager to hear your questions. I think there's going to be somebody with a microphone. No. Okay. If you ask a question, I'll repeat it so everybody can hear it. And maybe I'll stand up. Yes.
So you talked about walking through gardens. How about sitting in gardens?
Good question.
Did everybody hear that? No. Okay. You asked that Isabelle had talked about walking through gardens, but what about sitting in them?
It's the only way to be in a garden. If you walk through a garden, all you can see are the things you're supposed to see, the sort of the superficial, and you don't get it. But if you go and sit anywhere in a garden and just kind of how did you ask that question? How did you know? If you would just kind of let things be and let yourself be there, then like the inspirations come and the feelings come and you realize you're part of it. And those last couple of years, I go out into my own backyard garden and sit down, and right away I feel kind of like, Look at all this happening all by itself. Trees are shading and the plants are growing and they're making their chlorophyll and the birds are pulling worms and the worms are growing and I don't have to do any of that. It's all being there and I'm just part of it. It's lovely. And then you get back to the office and you grind and do all the practical things, wash the dishes.
You did tell me once that you wanted to melt into your own garden one day.
I think I did, yeah. Gardens should have lots of places to sit down. For one thing, it's just nice for people. And number two is it does give you a chance to really be in the garden in the correct way.
I see Susan's hand here and then a hand in there. Susan, go ahead.
Well, I've known the work that is in Hazel's book for a long time, and I've come to think of it as a translation from the three-dimensional, the garden, into language, another dimension. And that's a very hard kind of translation to conduct. And I'm wondering whether for you, Isabelle, when you read it, do you recognize features of the garden and of the relationship between you and the garden and you and Hazel in the book, in the translation?
You want to repeat?
Did everyone hear that? Everybody heard that. Go ahead.
What a question. Yeah. Yes and no. When I read the book, it was hard for me to get it. I just kind of recognized Hazel as in another realm that isn't mine, and I'm trying to kind of get a toehold and catch on. But the minute I heard somebody else read the book, I began to get it. And I'm realizing tonight that the more I hear it read, the more broadly I understand things. And I got lots of new insights tonight, actually.
Interesting, thank you.
Your question there.
So, Isabelle, at the end of the day, you mentioned that the architecture, well, at the beginning of the day, you mentioned the architecture was offending, and the wall particularly, the walkway architecture. At the end of the day, do you feel that the garden is better because of the offense?
Did everybody hear that question? Yeah. Yes, I think you thrive on a fence.
Yes, in a nutshell, I do. I can't imagine anything that would have driven me to those heights, to imagine such preposterous. I was really trying to imagine preposterous things. And, you kind of jack yourself up, you jack yourself up more and more. And then pretty soon you are at a place where you see things differently, and the ideas come like, well, of course, we'll just do this, and we'll just do this and this. Good question.
Yes, Rick, and then I see two questions here.
So, just what you just said about the fence and your sense of hospitality and invitation, are you being drawn in by that sense of wildness? Is that creating the friction? And isn't that in fact what anything organic would do?
I need more clarification. I don't quite follow
I'm
the...
thinking of what the poet and ecologist and designer Robert Bringhurst says about the fence, where he lives in Nova Scotia. And the first thing he does when he acquires this house is to take down the fence so that the wildness can reassert itself. And it seems to me that what you're describing in the sense of invitation and hospitality is that you're restoring the wildness to a place.
I love that, and I don't know if I actually accomplished that. I was certainly trying to heal the rifts that those walls put and the corners of that big, enormous bulk of the house in a small way, I would say, in a very minute way. Actually, the garden is full of detail, which is, I think, is part of what makes people like, ooh, what am I looking at here? And I don't think I ever felt I got the wildness back in, because it was a rather small garden inside those walls and everything was pretty tidy. However, the big oaks around the outside kind of are standing there bigger than the house and the walls. You know, there's a piece of architecture that I've loved. You know, it could sound like I'm ranting on architects, but there is a piece of architecture that did just what you explained 100-fold, and that was, words. Well, Thorn Crown Chapel by Fay Jones. You walk in that and you're 100-fold in the forest, much more than when you're in the pathway to there or anything. I actually went partway down the aisle and then I started sobbing. You see right through the glass, but there is a structure. There's vertical structure to hold up the roof. And by the way, when I looked at the photographs, I realized that the angle of the roof trusses were exactly the angle of the slanting branches of that deciduous forest. I don't know whether he picked up on that or it happened, but I know that he was very deliberate about a lot of things. And the reason the house, the chapel looks the way it is because in trying to provide what the farmer wanted, a place of respite for travelers, that he decided that it should not be built with bulldozers to, you know, mow down the forest. It should be built in such a way that two men and a footpath could take care of it. So there's nothing more solid than whatever they are, 6x6s or something in this enormous chapel. So I think that is a real homage to really taking in where you are, Fay Jones, where he was, and not being destructive, not being in any way offensive.
Thank you. There are two questions right here. And if Sylvia's here,
If we have time for two more,
and that's it, okay. And I just want to mention that Isabelle and I are at the book den.
Thank you so much. I just enjoyed hearing you both so much,
Yeah.
and I'd love to hear from both of you, because I admire so much to think of a poet and a writer waxing poetic over the beauty of art. And that's just such a wonderful thing. I'm moved by that. But I did want to ask Isabelle Greene, for example, if you're doing a garden as you often have for the Green and Green, how much do you try to observe what was their original intent, since they were such wonderful minds caring about?
None of that, none of that. I'll tell you what happened, the first one.
All right, thank you.
It was the Bromder house, the Spinks house. And it was my job just to create a little garden at the side of the property. And I was dumbstruck at the idea of moving a single brick or a single roll of the land. I could not imagine changing anything that was there. It's partly because when I'm in the green homes and landscapes, it feels right. And of course, also I know about the fame and everything. And the only thing that broke through on that job was that on the back porch, there are these strange, there are two members that stick up from the porch. They're verticals with a crossbar, and they're just sitting there. They're not holding up a tarpaulin or a roof or anything at all. They're just sitting there. And I thought, how humorous. And that house was mostly my grandfather, not Charles. I thought, isn't that a humorous statement to make? What did he do that for? Was he humorous? And then I thought, I'm going to lay that down. And in the horizontal plane, I'm going to lead that off to the garden. And then I thought, my grandfather is having a ball. He loves it. And from then on, you know, I could just play around with his land just easily.
Your question, thank you.
Sorry, can you talk about your relationship with plants? Because we're talking about gardening, so we haven't really.
Are you asking Hazel or me?
You,
Isabelle, I'm sorry.
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with plants?
No, I mean, I couldn't stop talking about them. I grew up with plants. The first memory I have of plants is
No,
about,
he asked clients.
oh,
How do you work
clients.
with clients?
Beg your
Yeah.
pardon.
Plants, okay, sorry, you were right, sorry, plants.
Obviously I love plants. Obviously I do. I played with plants when I was tiny. I had a Cecil Bruner rose and a columbine plant when I was 8 years old. I don't know how to start. I don't know how to stop talking about them. Plants are my friends. They're my relatives. They've been with me since the day I first opened my eyes. They'll never go away. They're my vocabulary. I don't even think about this as a plant. They're just part of my vocabulary.
Just wanted to say that we're at the Book Den on Saturday at 4 o'clock, if you would like to tell your friends. And I think that's it. Sylvia, do you want to say anything? Or?
No, well, I thank you all for coming and for your nice questions. Thank you, Isabelle and Hazel.